And this kind of concludes the covenant doctrine or document that we've been learning about the past few weeks. So it started off in Exodus 20 when we got the Ten Commandments, where God told them specifically, this is what I expect. And now it's gone on through 21, now 22 and 23. It's kind of clarifying things and finalizing it. So Lord, I pray that you would prepare all of our hearts here, me to speak your word and everyone else here to hear what needs to be heard. I pray that you would make your word clear to us today. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. So if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it was an ox or a donkey or a sheep, then he shall restore double. Basically, theft doesn't pay. If you get caught stealing, then you have to pay back between double to 5 times what you stole. The reason he gives a higher punishment for stealing an ox than for, say, stealing a sheep is at this time, an ox was your livelihood. Your ox pulled the plow to plant your fields. Your ox was what pulled your cart to take your stuff to wherever you had to go. It'd be like stealing in the Old West, if you were a horse rustler, you were, it was capital punishment back then. Today, you don't get killed for stealing a car, but you get punished pretty severely compared to stealing my phone. Mm-hmm. And the reasoning behind the difference, if you're caught in theft at night and you get killed, then the person who killed you isn't guilty, versus if you steal during the daytime, they can't just kill you. It's explained here by Robert Jameson. He says, a robber breaking into a house at midnight might in self-defense be slain with impunity. But if he is slain after sunrise, it would be considered murder. For it is not thought likely an assault would then be made upon the lives of the occupants. So essentially, if you break into the house in the middle of the night, the person in that house has more reason, more logical thought that you're there to do harm to them as well, besides just stealing. Whereas if you break in the daytime, apparently it was less likely because you'd actually be awake and could defend yourself versus being roused from sleep or killed in your sleep. And the law that he gives is for restitution. It's not just like, well, you stole something, don't do it again. You stole something, you need to make that person whole. Because they're losing time, they're losing effort, they're losing things, to your theft, as well as the thing that you actually stole, so you need to make that person whole. I kind of thought of that, and I looked at it and I said, Jesus made restitution for us. He paid the cost for us. So when you're looking at restitution, it has to make somebody whole. Before we have Christ, if we don't have him, we're not whole. We have a gaping hole in us. When we accept his payment for our sins, for our crimes, he's making restitution to make us whole. And he didn't even do anything wrong. So if a man causes a field or a vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that stacked grain, standing grain, or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. So as we saw last week, we're responsible for our actions. I may not have intended to start a fire that spread and burned up your field or burned up your stores of grain, but I was careless enough that the fire I started did cause damages. I need to make sure that I make you whole again, that I make restitution. We see that carelessness becomes a sin. We saw that last week also. If you allow or cause a situation that leads to harm to somebody else, you are responsible for that. You need to make restitution. So the violation of what Jesus would tell us is the second greatest commandment. to love others as you love yourself. If I'm being careless enough to where I damage somebody else's belongings or somebody else, that means that I'm putting my own ease, my own self ahead of that other person. Because last week it was an ox. If an ox killed someone and you knew that that ox was dangerous, it was throwing its head around and it gored somebody, but you knew it did that, you're guilty for that person's death. Because you were too careless. You cared about your loss of money, your loss of income from the ox more than you cared about the fact that it could kill someone. You cared more about kindling a fire for whatever reason than you cared about making sure that fire was contained. And Joshua had to save a couple of friends a while back because they were out shooting and caught a fire. And he had to go out and make restitution for them to put that fire out and save it from getting worse. He was looking out for everybody else, looking out for his friends for that matter, because they would have been in big trouble if that had gotten out of control. It's a good thing that he was there. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or for any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep, and it dies, is hurt, or is driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, if he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods. The owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. And if a man borrows anything from his neighbor, and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it not being with it, he shall surely make it good. But if the owner was with it, he shall not make it good. If it was hired, it came for its hire. So here, we need to let the judges decide our disputes. And this wasn't talking about, necessarily our legal system today, but talking about the judges that were appointed back then to judge according to godly tenets, what God had to say on things. And obviously today, the law of the land states if the judge says it, you must obey, so we still have to obey. But the original design was for God-fearing men and women, or God-fearing men to be judges, and we'd go before them, and they would decide, well, what happened here? If you give something to your neighbor to borrow and he loses it, or it gets stolen, you go before the judge, and the judge will determine, based on evidence, based on that person, is that person scamming you? Did they just steal it and keep it for themselves and claim it was stolen, or was it actually stolen? And that judge's decision is final. The word used here for judges is Elohim. The word Elohim means gods. I was not saying that the judges were themselves literally gods. They weren't, above everybody. But they were like little gods. They were representatives of God on this earth. Kind of like how we're called Christians because we're supposed to be like little Christs. The name actually originally came about as a means of mocking us. Look at the little Christs over there. They think they're so great. But we said, well, we kind of like that. We're supposed to be like Christ. We're supposed to be like him, so why would that be a mockery? Why would we be mad that he said that we're like him? And so the name stuck. And it protects our liability. If I lend an animal to you, and that animal, while it's with you, dies or becomes injured, sometimes it just happens. You can do whatever you can do. You can do everything possible to keep that animal safe, and it might just be that animal's time. That animal might die, or that animal might step in a hole that there was nothing you could do about and break its leg. For a legit accident, something that's not your fault, then God is making sure that it's known you're not to be held liable for that, because who would ever borrow something from anybody if something beyond your control happens and you are stuck having to make restitution for that? But if it's stolen, it means that you probably were a little bit careless with it. You left it unsecured. You didn't do what you're supposed to do, and it got stolen. But he says that if it was torn by wild animals, if you got a donkey out and a wolf comes up and kills it, well, what are you supposed to do? Fight off a pack of wolves or fight off a lion yourself? There's not many people in this world that have ever done that. So, no, you're not liable if a wild animal comes and kills the thing. But the last thing he says is, if the owner was with it, he shall not make it good. If it was hired, it came for its hire. So if I hire you to come with your ox and plow a trench for me, and in the process of you plowing that trench with your ox becomes injured or dies, that's not my fault because you were operating the ox. I can't be held liable. Like if somebody comes over with we're having to look at getting our leach line redone at our house. If we hire somebody to come over with a tractor and dig that leach line out for us, and he's operating the tractor and does something wrong with it and tips over and breaks the tractor, that's not my fault. He's got to pay for his tractor, not me. But if I go and I say, hey, let me borrow your tractor, and I break his tractor, then by all means, that's on me. Now, if a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. But if her father utterly refuses to give her to him, then he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. This is one of those times when we look at a very different culture from today. Because back then, when you married somebody, you paid the father for the right to marry that woman. And if she was still a virgin, she got a higher bride price. So if you go and you take that away, now the family doesn't get as much money, and so you have to make restitution for that. You've done a damage. So again, it just goes right back to, if we cause harm to somebody else, if we take something from somebody else, we are liable for that. And especially back then, it would make it more difficult for her to find a decent husband. And so now she may end up being single because you have gone and besmirched her. And so you have to make restitution. Like I said, it's a pretty different culture from today, but he's making sure that he's covering the bases that if we do something that causes harm to somebody else, we don't just walk away from it. We are held liable. Now you shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. And he who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. So there are some things that get put in there and it's blatant. It says plainly exactly what God wants. My boss likes to listen to this radio show. It's all about paranormal stuff. And one of the people that calls in semi-frequently to there is a lady who says she's a witch and a Christian. And I said, well, that's not possible. He goes, oh, really? Why not? Well, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. God obviously has a problem with people who are seeking after magic, seeking after other powers besides him. Now, obviously today we're not supposed to go out and hunt witches and kill them. That's kind of goes against the law of the land. Goes against the new covenant that we're under, for that matter. We're under grace. But he's pretty plain. He does not like that. Verse 19, I don't think I need to really touch on. And he who sacrifices to any god, I speak on this often. Anything that you allow in your life that goes between you and God, that goes before God, that's another god. If you are willing to sacrifice, God's morals and God's ethics to make more money or to have more fun or to do whatever, then you are putting another god before him. You are sacrificing your time, your money, your life to that other god. And while we may live under grace today where you're not going to be utterly destroyed, like God's looked down and go, oh, you're dead. That doesn't happen anymore. If you die still sacrificing to that other god, if you die without making the God, the true God, the Lord of your life, the first in your life, if you don't belong to him, that when you die, you're not going into heaven. Your spirit, your soul will be utterly destroyed in bondage in hell. We get sidetracked in life a lot because, well, all these things, I like to play computer games. That in and of itself isn't bad. But if I'm doing that instead of spending time with God, or if I never spend time with God because I'm always doing that, that's bad. I like off-roading. I currently don't have anything to off-road in, but when I did, that was the thing that occupied my mind. I had a Jeep Cherokee, and I loved it. I built it from scratch. But I spent entirely too much time thinking on that thing. I could still tell you, what year certain changes happened, even though none of those years had anything to do with mine. Because I spent entirely too much time thinking on my Jeep, thinking on off-roading, on all that kind of stuff. A Jeep, going off-road, those aren't bad things. I think they're wonderful things. But if you put that ahead of your time with God, if that's the first thing in your mind instead of God, then that's a God and you're wrong. We need to be very careful in what we allow into our hearts and into our lives to make sure that we aren't letting something in between us and God, because if we let something between us and God, it's not going to go well for us. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way, and they cry at all to me, I will surely hear their cry. My wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will be widows, and your children fatherless. Basically, he's telling the people of Israel, you know what it's like to be a stranger. You know what it's like to be oppressed. You just came out of Egypt, months ago. They know how it is. And so if you, especially knowing how it is, knowing what it's like to be mistreated, why would you mistreat someone else? Why would you do to somebody else what was just done to you that was wrong? But also he looks out for widows and for the fatherless. Because again, in this society, in this culture, it was hard for a woman on her own. And so if you didn't have a man of the house, he was generally the one who made all the money, who took care of everything, who was the protection. If you don't have that, in the society to which he was writing, you were in trouble. Your life was going to be very difficult. And we look at Ruth later on in the Bible, and her mother, they were gleaning from fields because they didn't have anything to their name, because everything was in their husbands' names. And so God is saying, look out for them. Don't leave them alone. Especially don't mess them over. Because he's going to look out for them. If you mess them over, he's going to mess you over. Now, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. Essentially, again, don't take advantage of the poor. We see that today being a huge issue when you look at payday loans. That's what it is. All the payday loans where you go and you need, I need $500 for payday. You go in there, you get your $500, but then they charge you like 50% interest on that. You get $500, but the following week you pay them back $800. They're ripping you off. It's not right. God is against that. Especially because, generally speaking, if you need a payday loan, you probably don't have a lot of money. You would be considered among the poor. And so they're taking advantage of the poor. If you're lending to the poor and charging them interest, you're taking advantage of them. But you know that it specifically says, any of my people who are poor. It doesn't say that a loan with interest on its own is naturally bad, but don't take advantage of the poor. If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. If you take something as a pledge, that means it's your collateral. When you take out a mortgage, your house is your pledge. If you don't pay it, they take your house. He's saying, if you take something like their garment that they sleep in, that's their covering, that's a protection, that's their pledge, but you need to return it to them because you don't want the dude sleeping outside or sleeping with no covering and being freezing all night or exposed to bugs and all that other stuff. And you should not revile God, nor curse the ruler of your people. That's one that kind of hurts us today. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. How often do we see Christians, our fellow believers, people in churches, look at whoever's president, whether it was Obama, Trump, Biden, whoever, and say, oh, that evil guy, I hate that guy. That guy, he's so bad, he's terrible. Well, who put that guy in there? Who put that guy in charge? Whether I like the guy or not, God put him there. And for me to curse him, for me to wish for his downfall, for me to wish for him to be taken out of there, I'm sinning. It doesn't matter who he is. God put him there, and I'm commanded not to curse him. It's difficult, and I don't like it, but I'd rather do what God says than bring curses on myself. It says, likewise, you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th you shall give it to me. And you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You will throw it to the dogs. You notice that he says, you shall not revile God nor curse the ruler of people. You shall not delay the first of your ripe produce. And likewise with your oxen and sheep. To delay to give to God what he has commanded us to give, to what we rightfully owe to him, what we should give to him, is to revile him. And that's not me trying to lay a guilt trip on you guys to go back and put money in the box. That could be anything of ours, whether it's our money that we give in tithe, our time that we give in service, our boldness that we use to share the gospel with people that we know. If we are withholding anything from him, anything that he's supposed to get, we're reviling him. Because if I'm afraid to tell people about my God, obviously I don't think that highly of my God. I think more highly of the people that are around me than I do of my God. He says, you should be holy men to me. I looked up the meaning of those two words, and I thought it was interesting. Holy is Kodesh. The word is Kodesh Ish, holy men. Kodesh means holy. It means holy, set apart, separated, consecrated. We're supposed to be separated from this world. Our lives, our hearts, our morals aren't supposed to be lined up perfectly with this world. It's supposed to be lined up perfectly with God. Will there be some overlap? Yes. God says murder is bad, so does the world. Those types of things we're going to line up. But if we're living according to the world, if we're living fully in the world system and we're not living according to God's plan, then we're not separated, we're not set apart, we're not consecrated. Our lives are supposed to belong to him. No. Ish is the word for men, or the word that's translated there as men. And that's what I found to be really interesting. That word can be translated both as champion and as servant, or as great men. You don't think of a champion or a great man in the same sentence or the same line that you would think of as a servant. But God does. The world's idea of a great man, the world's idea of a champion, is someone who other people serve. I'm the greatest, you do what I say. The way that God looks at it is, I have great power, I am exalted above others, I will serve those others. God is the greatest, and he came to serve us in the form of Jesus. So if you want to be a great man, if you want to be a champion, you need to be a servant too. The world's champions are known for their ability to dominate others. God's champions are known for their ability to serve others. Now you shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. You shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. Basically, integrity, honesty, righteousness, impartiality. God is no respecter of people, neither should we be. God doesn't worry about what everybody likes. God worries about what is actually right. The saying, already has a saying, 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong. Well, I believe 50 million Elvis fans can be wrong, because God just said it. Majority rule isn't always right. I've got nothing against Elvis, just to put that out there. He's got great music. But just because everybody likes something, just because the world says this is how it's got to be, does not mean that that's the right way. Narrow is the great and straight is the path that leads to righteousness. If you're following a wide path that's nice and easy and everybody's in it, you're probably on the wrong path. James Kaufman wrote that Johnson applied this, I don't know who Johnson is, but he applied this to mob violence, such as a lynching. But far more than that is included. Before Exodus was concluded, all Israel followed the majority report of the 10 unfaithful spies, resulting in a 40-year probation for the whole nation. Majorities in all ages have been disastrously wrong. It was the vociferous and clamorous insistence of the majority that crucified the Lord. Now, of course, that was God's plan, was for Jesus to be crucified, but still, everybody said, give us the murderer, kill him, who really hasn't done anything but say things we don't like. When they sent out the spies into the land, they sent 12 spies. 12 came back and said, the giants were like grasshoppers to them. There's no way we should just give up now. 2 of them came back and said, yeah, it's all true. They're powerful and mighty, but you know what? God's on our side. We can do this. They followed the majority because the majority said, no way. And as a result, none of the men of that generation made it into the promised land. Or none of the people of that generation, minus Joshua and Caleb. So sometimes, if they had followed after Joshua and Caleb and said, you know what, you're right, God can do this. God's more powerful than any of them. They would have all seen the promised land. They would have all seen exactly what they'd been promised. Everything that they had been striving for, had been looking forward to, they would have seen it. But they didn't. 1 Corinthians 15:33 tells us, do not be deceived, for evil company corrupts good habits. So if the majority is wrong, and you're hanging out with that wrong majority, hey, guess what's going to happen? You're going to end up being corrupted yourself. You're going to end up saying, well, everybody else is going that way. I should probably go that way too. It's human nature. It's what we do. We say safety in numbers, but if those numbers are wrong, then that's it. You're not safe. Now, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. It's telling us to look out for each other, but more importantly than that, he says, if you see your enemy's donkey going astray, return it to him. So it's not just look out for the people you like. That's easy. We all do that. But if you see something wrong happening to somebody you don't like, somebody who has it out for you even, we're called to help that person, to say, hey, you know what? Let me bring that donkey back over. I don't want them to lose this. I don't want them to be in trouble because something happened to them. Because guess what's going to happen? If you have an enemy, somebody who's evil to you, and you're evil right back to them, they're just going to be an even bigger enemy. They're going to stay your enemy. You're going to continue to have problems with that person. But if somebody's evil to you and you return goodness to them, you look out for their well-being and you help them. You help them to come up. Unless they're just completely evil, you're not going to have that person as an enemy for very long. If somebody's being good to me, I'm like, why is he so nice to me? Maybe I should be nice to them. It's hard to be mean to someone who's being kind to you. And more important than that, if you're kind to them, if you're good to them, if you're looking out for them, then they're going to potentially say, you know, well, I've been nothing but bad to that guy, but he's been being great to me, and he's a Christian. Maybe there's something to that. Bill, when he taught here, he told us the story of how when he was a truck driver, he'd bring his lunch in every day, and this other guy would bring his lunch in every day, and that guy was a Christian. He brought his Bible to read his Bible, and Bill would go out of his way to go and mess up that dude's lunch. You know, take a sandwich, he'd crush it up or whatever, and just be mean and evil to that guy. This is before he was saved, of course. And that guy never returned evil for that evil. The guy was always good back to him. And in large part due to that guy's example, that guy's testimony, his witness, his example that he set for him that led to Bill getting saved. And he went on and taught here for many years and was a great man as a result. You never know what effect your witness, your actions, your testimony is going to have on people. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be standing up here. I mean, I was saved before him, but he's the one that really pushed me into being a teacher. Now you shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. Keep yourself far from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will justify the wicked. I will not justify the wicked. There we go. That makes a lot more sense. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. Also you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You don't take part in unrighteousness or injustice. The point I wanted to make that I skipped over. He says, not to show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. Basically saying, don't let pity influence you. Because you would say, well, there's a number of people who would look at that and say, well, why would he tell us not to show partiality to a poor man? Like, I think what he really meant was, don't show partiality to the great man, which was confusing how you would get there, because that's the exact opposite of what he said. But what God is saying is, poor people, people that you have pity on, people that you would normally, say we need to help that guy out, they can be just as wrong as the guy that's rich. Rich or poor, you can be good or bad. It doesn't matter what your financial status is. Don't let that influence you. Don't be a respecter of persons. Now 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its produce, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave, the beasts of the field may eat. In like manner you shall do with your vineyard and your olive grove. So 6 years you profit off your land. The 7th year you just let it do its thing. And in that 7th year, the poor of your land can come in and eat off of whatever grows. Elsewhere we see that God will give you extra in the 6th year to make sure that you don't go hungry in the 7th year, because he's not going to say, help yourself out, do good, but for the 7th year, you're going to starve, but I'm going to help out the poor. No, he's going to make sure that you're taken care of, but he's also making sure the poor are taken care of as well. But it's also letting the land rest. 6 days you shall do your work, and on the 7th you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth. So he's just expanding on the Sabbath law. We already read, for 6 days you shall work, the 7th you're going to rest. But it also carries over to our land. For 6 years your land will work, and for the 7th it will rest. And this is actually a pretty good agricultural thing to do today even. If you grow too much out of the land, especially if you grow the same thing in the land, it's going to suck all the nutrients out, and then the land won't be any good. So you just let it grow and lie fallow. Whenever it grows, people will eat, and then it'll die and be plowed under again and replenish the soil. And God's looking out for his people. And he created the Sabbath for us. He wants us to keep his name holy and to worship him only. He didn't create the Sabbath to be a burden on us. He didn't create it to be like, oh, well, I'm only allowed to go 15 feet away from my bed, so I better make sure I got everything I need right here. And, oh, no, I forgot to bring water over here. I guess I'm thirsty all day. It's not meant to be what it's become under the law, where everything is difficult, everything is a burden. It's meant to give rest. Now 3 times you shall keep a feast of me in the year. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month of Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty. And the feast of harvest, the first fruits of your labors which you have sown in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before the Lord God. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until the morning. The first of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And so, what he's saying here, he's laying out the feasts, 3 of them at least. But he says, a couple of things he says are specifically against pagan practices of the time that Israel is probably starting to fall under, because if you know anything about the nation of Israel throughout the Old Testament, they have a tendency to fall under pagan practices of the people around them at the drop of a hat. One of the pagan practices was whatever you sacrificed, you kept a piece of that as a good luck charm. And it says, nor shall the fat of my sacrifice remain until morning. Don't keep anything. The whole of the sacrifice goes to him, and it goes when you sacrifice. Do not try and keep it as a good luck charm. And they also would boil a young goat in the mother's milk to try and ensure a bountiful harvest or fertility in the flocks or whatever they're trying to get out of it. And God says, no, that doesn't work. Don't do that either. There's a few things that we'll see as we read through all of the law that you look and go, who would do such a weird thing? Well, the people around Israel would do it, and Israel was starting to do some of those things most likely too. And so God says, no, don't fall into these practices. Do not bring any other Lord, any other God into your house. It says, behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way, to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him and obey his voice. Do not provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. One of the theologians I was reading point out we don't know a whole lot of angels by name. We know of Michael and Gabriel, and if you look at their name, Michael and Gabriel, the Lord's name is in both of them. He's not talking about them, though. That angel that he's speaking of is the angel of the Lord. It is Jesus, the angel of the Lord that you see throughout the Old Testament, Jesus making an appearance just to lead the people or to protect the people. Because Michael and Gabriel, they don't have the authority to where you better obey them, nor do they have the ability to judge us. In fact, God tells us that we will be judging the angels. The only one who judges us is God. The only one who has the authority to say, I will not pardon your transgressions, is God himself. So it's another little moment where kind of Jesus makes an appearance here in the Old Testament. But if you indeed obey his voice and do all that I speak, then I'll be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and completely break down their sacred pillars. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your head and your water, or bless your bread and your water. And I will take sickness away from the midst of you. No one shall suffer miscarriage or be barren in your land, and I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my fear before you. I will cause confusion among all the people to whom you come, and I'll make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send hornets before you, which will drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate, and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you until you have increased, and you inherit the land. So he says, I'm not going to leave you. He's sending Jesus to guide them, Jesus to protect them. If you follow him, if you follow the Lord, then he's going to bless you. He says that he also works things out in their proper times. He says, I won't drive out your enemies from before you right away. I'm not going to just push everybody out and now the land's empty. As you come along, I'll push them out ahead of you. Because if the land sits empty for too long without people living in it, nature comes and takes the land back. All the beasts of the field are going to come back and take back over. Now they got to fight off wild animals instead of people. The land itself would have issues. And so as they come through, God's going to push them out and make room for them as they go, just to make sure that they can take the land and the land's going to be ready to go right away. And I will set your bounds from the Red Sea to the sea, Philistia, and from the desert to the river. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare unto you. We're going to see, as they move in to take the land, that last bit is going to be a problem for them. They're going to be told, get rid of everyone. And they're going to save a few. They're going to be told, don't keep anything from them. They're going to keep some. They're told here, don't worship their gods. Knock down their sacred places. They're going to worship their gods and use their sacred places. But we're also going to see that God doesn't just say, well, you guys are idiots and you couldn't do what I said, so I'm done with you. Every time that they realize that they're wrong and they come back to him, God's right there. David Guzik says about driving them out, says, though it sometimes frustrates us, this is often the way God works in our life. He clears things out little by little, though we might prefer it all at once. You know, if I'm being told this is what I have for you, I want you to step into that, it sure would be nice to be able to look up and go, yep, everything's clear, it's ready for me. That's not what God does a lot of times. He'll say, you start walking forwards, and I'm going to clear it out as you go. So I have to have faith that God's going to continue working for me. That as I take a step into this ground, that ground's going to hold. And next I got to step into that ground, and that it's going to be ready for me in there. And he gives another reminder to keep God preeminent. He gives them the feast of the unleavened bread. Why would he say unleavened bread? Because leaven represents sin. So a little bit of leaven, a little bit in the bread will raise the whole thing. A little bit of sin in your life will corrupt you. So he's warning them, don't let any corruption in. If you're letting the world, if you're letting the gods of the people around you, if you're letting just the world system direct your life and be what guides you, what directs you, you need to kick all that out. You need to push that off to the side. You need to keep focused just on God. So, Donald Fleming, in the Abridged Bible Commentary, writes just about these past few chapters, the covenant document which began in chapter 20, which has laid down God's requirements for his people, concludes with a number of promises and warnings. This again follows the well-known form of ancient covenant documents. The specific promises for God's people were protection on their journey to the promised land, victory over enemies, health and prosperity in Canaan, and national expansion until they filled their allotted territory. These blessings, however, were conditional upon their obedience and complete loyalty to God. So, as I said, we're going to see where they don't have complete loyalty. They tend to be disobedient. And so they never get their full allotment. They don't have their complete protection. They fall away from God, and then bad things happen to them. And you can see that even today. We live under our new covenant. We live under the covenant of grace, but when we follow what God commands, when we follow what God wants for us, we find that things go better. The world may come against us. You know, Satan, when he sees you doing the right thing, when he sees you reaching for God, he's going to come and try and pull you away, trying to distract you. But if you don't let go of God, he pulls you through it. He gets you through whatever things come in your path. So we need to be sure that whatever we're doing in our lives, that we're making sure that we keep our focus in the right place. When Peter was focused on Jesus, he stepped out of that boat and he walked on the water. And then it says when he looked around at the wind and the waves, that's when he sank. But as soon as he reached out and called out to Jesus, Jesus pulled him right back up again. If we keep our focus on God, we won't sink. We can have waves and winds and terrifying things all around us, because even just being on a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee could be a terrifying thing when those storms came in. To this day, storms will come out of nowhere and just rile up that whole lake, that whole sea. But especially if you're standing on the water, you're walking on water, and you're like, there's no way that I should be doing this right now. I can't stand on water. But you have your focus on Jesus, he's going to carry you through. It's when you look around and you see everything else around you, and you let that fear come in, you let that shake your faith. That's when you're going to sink. That's when you're going to have problems. So if it feels like you're going through too much and you can't get through, you can't handle what's going on in your life, check your faith. Check what you're looking at. Check where your focus is. It's not an easy thing. I've had to, numerous times in my life, I've been just wallowing and trying to figure out what's happening. I have to force my focus off of what's happening around me and just put it up to Jesus. So you know what? Whatever's happening, God's going to pull me through this. If I hold on to him, he's not going to let go of me. And every single time he has pulled me through. Every single time he has made something happen. I could share numerous things, but in the interest of time, I won't right now. Just, if you feel like things are too much for you, it's never too much for him. Take your focus off of the things around you. Take your focus off of what you're going through and put it on the one who's going to pull you through it. So Lord, I pray right now that you would speak to us, that you would lead us and guide us in our lives, that you would, Lord, make your presence felt, make your presence known. For anyone who's dealing with problems, anyone who's going through stress and strife, and it's just too much, Lord, that they would look up and they would see you and they'd reach out to you. And Lord, you would pull them up from sinking. I pray, Lord, that you help us to remember to keep our focus on you and to keep our hearts driven by you instead of focused on the world and driven by the world. Lord, help us to be good witnesses, good examples to the people around us. Help us, Lord, when opportunity comes for us to share our testimony with people, that we would share it boldly with them. Because if you've called us to share our testimony with someone, then, Lord, you have a cause behind it. Even if they laugh at us, that seed is still planted. I pray, Lord, that you would keep a hedge of protection around us as we go out this week. That, Lord, you would bring us all back here next week. And just help us to be a good light and a sanctuary that people can come to if they need guidance, if they need comfort. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Amen.